We spend the entire pre-season of Formula 1 waiting for real answers from the Australian Grand Prix. But were the real answers that we got in Melbourne ones that we can trust at this stage? We're here to talk about Ferrari, which the expectations were huge for the team going into this weekend. And really, it didn't work out at all. Ferrari ended up a long way off Mercedes and getting beaten by Red Bull. And I've got Jack Cozens and Ben Anderson here to try and dissect what went wrong for Ferrari and to gauge how accurate the picture perhaps was for the team, and to compare what we saw in Australia to what we saw in testing. Jack, we'll come to you first. You were working the Autosport.com and Motorsport.com news desk all weekend, so you've been on Australian time and dealing with our journalists who were out there. And what I thought was really telling was that as part of Ferrari's new kind of media charm offensive, we did get a reasonable amount of explanation from both drivers and team boss Mattia Binotto on Sunday night. And it wasn't necessarily what we would have expected in terms of they weren't that down in the dumps.
Yeah. I think on a weekend where we're really actually quite disappointed in Ferrari's showing on track, there's still something to be quite pleased about after the race, because they were refreshingly open in their analysis of how their weekend had gone. So towards the end of last year, when things were going quite badly for Vettel and Ferrari, we were used to getting short, sharp and occasionally sarcastic answers from him. But here, there was a real nice bit of elaboration on the issues that they're experiencing in the race, and how actually they recognised that they were very quick in testing and that this wasn't what they were expecting coming into the weekend. So a refreshing approach, really.
Yeah, they weren't as defensive as you might have expected, or as we might have seen last year when Maurizio Arrivabene was in charge and something could be on fire and he'd say, "There's no fire here, what are you talking about?" Ben, Jack mentioned testing briefly there, and one of the things that obviously came out of the weekend as it developed and as it became apparent that Ferrari didn't have the pace was, okay, well, everything we saw in testing was wrong. Ferrari could have potentially hidden behind that and said, look, we showed what our pace was, but clearly the others didn't. However, they didn't take that option, and as Jack says, they were very open about saying, actually, no, what we saw in testing was real, the car was great, we knew it was quick, we were confident, something's gone wrong here. That was the picture they painted for us, wasn't it?
Yeah, I guess it's a sign of the new regime at Ferrari that they don't take the hiding places when offered to them now. There's no value in that. They're trying to deal with reality. And reality, according to testing, was that Ferrari were fastest. Even Mercedes came to that conclusion at the end of the 2 weeks.
Well, every team in the pit lane did. I think there's an assumption that you look at the times, you go, well, they're at the top, so they must be quickest. But our journalists were doing their analysis and then speaking to a lot of the teams who will, off the record, will share some of their data with us and explain the ranking that they think they've got. And everybody had Ferrari out front. They had the majority of the midfield was correct as well.
Yeah.
And Christian Horner, straight after the race, said we all turned up here expecting to get trounced by Ferrari. And he's saying that just after his Honda-powered car overtook Vettel for third place.
Yeah, exactly. So we can believe Mercedes when they say they were surprised themselves at how competitive they were relative to the opposition in Australia. But that picture is skewed by Ferrari not extracting the maximum from their car. So we shouldn't really read into the Melbourne result thinking, oh, we've all misjudged Ferrari's pace, the car's a dog, they're not fast, it's going to be 2016 again and they'll be lucky if they beat Red Bull. I think we've seen Mercedes take a step from testing. They were behind the curve a little bit. Let's not forget they were 2 weeks from the end of Test 2 to the first race. That's a lot of time for the team to analyse everything, make refinements to set up and their approach. Clearly Mercedes came out all guns blazing, did a great job, but Ferrari, as a counterpoint to that, underperformed all weekend. The car wasn't there. Vettel said it lacked grip. He didn't have the confidence that he had in the car in Barcelona. Interestingly, he was making comments that were quite similar to the ones Valtteri Bottas was making about the Mercedes in week 1 of testing. Oh, the car works in some corners, not others. So it suggests the cars with these new aero rules are quite sensitive, difficult to get in the operating window. Mercedes struggled with that at the start of testing. They seem to have got on top of it. Ferrari started strongly or in the window, and now it seems they've fallen out of it. But we shouldn't necessarily panic about that. Ferrari, even though they won the Australian Grand Prix last year, struggled in a similar way. Vettel was saying they weren't happy with the car, the setup wasn't there, and then they went to the second race in Bahrain, nailed all the problems that they discovered from Melbourne and started the season strongly. And we can anticipate, knowing they've got a strong basic package, that similar could happen again this year.
I think it's certainly caught Ferrari off guard a little bit though, hasn't it? It came out the weekend, Vettel was saying that they do have answers to solve, and it is still a different situation to last year, because they rocked up at Melbourne and they were second best to Mercedes by quite a way. Vettel ended up winning by luck, really. But it wasn't the case this year, so we still don't know quite what to expect heading to Bahrain, I don't think.
Yeah, you were both at the second test where the Mercedes upgrade package arrived and clearly transformed that car, but the team still had work to do, and it's clear that no matter what has happened to Ferrari heading into Australia or what they got wrong in Melbourne, Mercedes took a step just through the time you can spend at the factory understanding your car and understanding perhaps its limitations and how to work around them. So would it be reasonable to expect Ferrari to do the same between Australia and Bahrain?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the top teams. They have huge divisions doing simulations, driver in the loop simulations, constantly throughout Grand Prix weekends. I think one of the disappointing aspects of Ferrari's race in Australia is that they weren't able to make really any progress through the weekend. We've been used to seeing them having disappointing Fridays and then turning it around with the help often of Antonio Giovinazzi in the simulator.
He was a bit busy this weekend, wasn't he, driving an Alfa Romeo?
Friday to Saturday night, yes, exactly. So they've taken a hit there, probably. Also, it suggests that the problems they were encountering were a bit more fundamental. I agree with Toto Wolff's assessment that it was basically they got the setup wrong and they couldn't find the right one, but it must have been quite a fundamental setup problem for them not really to ever get properly in the game. The only time Vettel looked competitive was early on Friday and early on Saturday as the track rubbered in more and everyone else took a step with the grip level. Ferrari really stood still relatively, so that's a concern. But of course we go to Bahrain, it's different ambient conditions, different track surface, different track layout, different tyres in terms of their operating windows potentially. So really Ferrari just has to go away, reset, make sure they've taken the lessons from Australia on board, but not panicked that the form of testing hasn't translated to the first race.
Ben, there was so much positivity around Ferrari and Mattia Binotto with the management change that took place over the winter. But for all the positive talk, all along we've been saying that the first real test of his leadership would be when something went wrong. Now I think we're right to say this isn't a crisis and Ferrari should not paint it as one, and I think it's been good what Jack was saying about the kind of mood and explanation they gave us afterwards, showing that they are going to be open, and they told us the truth basically, that they feel that they didn't get it right and they don't yet know why, and we'll see what comes out in Bahrain. But what did you make of the way Binotto perhaps portrayed himself? Because this was the first sign of him having to deal with something unravelling, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's indicative of him being an engineer first and foremost rather than a politician. So he deals in data, numbers, reality, facts. He's not really interested in spinning a picture that perhaps suits the sponsors a bit better. He can't hide behind the fact that Vettel was miles off the pace in qualifying and Ferrari weren't competitive in the race. So it's in his interest to kind of confront that and get to the bottom of it as soon as possible. I think he can afford to be quite relaxed about the situation as well. Okay, it is the first test in the sense that they haven't performed as expected at the first race, but as I was saying earlier, it was a similar story last year and they were able to get things much more on point for the second race in Bahrain. So he can probably say, well, we've been here before, guys. All we have to do is do a similar process to last year and we'll be fine.
It felt like a much more measured approach to what had gone on over the weekend. There was no panic that, like you say, there's no need to get into that. There wasn't an overreaction to finishing 4th and 5th and, you know, losing 35 seconds over the course of the 27 laps between Verstappen passing Vettel and the end of the race. Even in his appraisal of Charles Leclerc, who we haven't really talked about, Binotto was, I think, trod the line well between saying that things weren't perfect. It was a bit of a messy weekend for him, but also instilling that confidence in his drive to say, well, this looked good, and doing so in front of the media and the driver as well. That's a refreshing thing to see from Ferrari. We're not used to seeing that sort of public level of appreciation for their drivers.
And it's an important statement for Ferrari to make at the start of the season as well, when things have gone slightly awry. You don't want them to revert to the type we've seen before. It's important for the guys in the team to realise that this new regime is real, that the revolution inside Ferrari and its new public approach is real. They're not going to back down at the first sign of trouble. Long may it continue through the season.